Prof-It is brought to you by StopToShop.com, your ultimate source for Pokemon singles, tins, boxes, and cards from a variety of other games too. Type in the coupon code PROFIT in caps with a dash, and you'll sweeten the deal with a 10% discount on your full order. If you're looking for cards, make the stop at Stop to Shop.
You're ready to rock it with the nonsense and my hopes Poke projects. You won't stop till you're about to the top with all the hobbits. Hip with the metagame train, the reigning top kid's at the top of his game, and you can't hit my top this. You want the best tricks? I suggest you profit. You want a mess Brit? I suggest you drop it. Once we started rolling, you know you can't stop it. Let's go and get some lessons from JWittz and Prof-It. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's JWittz here with your last episode of Prof-It right before the United States National Championships. Tomorrow's going to be Canada's National Championships, which is going to be the first tournament ever with the Heart Gold Soul Silver On format, so we're all going to use that as kind of a base point as seeing how this tournament's going to play out, what kind of decks are going to win, and what kind of techs are the right solutions to the metagame. It's going to be really interesting, and I encourage you guys to check out the Pokegym threads to try and see what wins Canada before you head out to the United States National Championships. For everybody else, I'm just covering some Heart Gold Soul Silver on decks today, so even if you don't have a National Championships to attend, you'll still learn a lot about this new format and have a few new decks to test with. For those of you guys who do plan on going to Nationals, I don't recommend you change your deck last minute. We've got just a week until the event starts, and you really should have your deck all together, and you should just be deciding on a few last tech cards. However, if you need a test against a bigger variety of decks, I recommend you build some of the decks that I talk about today to test against. I wish you guys all the best at the event, and let's check out today's episode. First on our list of decks to talk about is Zekrom. Zekrom was one of the first decks that I talked about in Prof-It once we started talking about the Heart Gold Soul Silver On format, and I'll admit, I kind of played into the hype. I made it seem like it was one of the decks to beat in the format, and after more testing, it's kind of been sitting on the sidelines around Tier 2, Tier 1.5. It's not exactly the best deck in the format, but it definitely is one that you need to test against and look out for. Here's some of the problems that Zekrom has. Its first problem is that while it has probably the best early game in the entire Heart Gold Soul Silver On format, it kind of fizzles out. You're dealing 120 damage, which is good but not great as far as knocking out some of those huge attackers, and you really struggle against big things like Magnezone, Rayquaza Deoxys Legend, and Machamp Prime. Speaking of Machamp Prime, Donphan's also a big problem with his fighting weakness. However, for those of you guys still interested in Zekrom, and I'm not saying it's the worst play, it's still a decent deck, it's just not the best in the format, let's take a look at some of the things that I've learned about it. Now, here's the list for you guys to look at and work with if you haven't built a Zekrom skeleton before, and it should look very similar to the things that you see online or what you've heard so far. The strategy has been the same as it always has been. You start with Zekrom, he's got great HP, so he's a good starter. You drop Pachirisu, attach energies to Pachirisu, move them over as Shaman to Zekrom, and then attack very quickly for a high amount of damage. He's got a great attack with Outrage if he's not one-shot, which means that you can attack for 20 damage, plus the amount of damage counters that you have on you, and he's just all around a very fast Pokemon with high HP, and he's fairly easy to get out. However, when you don't get the full setup going and all these energy out at once, you do kind of fizzle out, which is why I recommend that you run at least one or two Clefas in the deck when you get a kind of bad hand and you need to start all over again. Now, Zekrom, like all the other decks that I'm going to talk about today, are kind of sidelined to the top decks because they suffer from not being able to have consistent draw. Decks with Magnezone, Ninetales, or even Shuckle are all going to be ones that can consistently draw through their deck without having to rely on top decking that right supporter. Because the supporters in this format are good but aren't amazing, such as Juniper, Sage's Training, Copycat, and Professor Oak's New Theory, you can get some decent draw, but it's not going to be anything close to compared to what the decks with Magnezone have. So, because you can't draw as consistently, you really have to hope for a very good starting hand, or some extremely good draws off your draw supporters. Now, like I said, that fighting weakness is going to be a huge problem because Donphan variants and Donphan Machamp are going to be extremely popular, and your only real way to combat this without running all kinds of other energy types and a strange tech that's going to be hard to get out is going to be Yamanga Prime. Yamanga Prime functions as a pretty decent attacker. You can do 70 damage or a 40 damage snipe with 0 energy as long as your hand size is the same as your opponent's hand size, but it's just not enough to get through those fighting Pokemon. You do have that fighting resistance, but they have that body which prevents 20 damage for each of your attacks. So both of you are 3-shotting each other, and the fighting deck will usually eventually plot through your Yamangas and eventually your Zekroms and win the game shortly afterward. I'm not saying that Yamanga definitely won't help, because if your opponent can't keep on getting set up with new Pokemon, Yamanga could eventually force its way through the fighting Pokemon, but I'm going to say 7 times out of 10, you're probably still going to lose that trade-off between Yamanga and fighting Pokemon. So the question remains, do you want to build Zekrom with the maximum potential to donk, or the maximum potential to not automatically lose to fighting? It's a tough trade-off, and it's one of the reasons why this deck isn't one of the best in the format anymore. However, despite all this, it's still going to be heavily played. People really like legendary Pokemon. It's still a decent deck. People like to donk, and it's definitely one that you should look out for this upcoming National Championships. Next up is a deck that I would have previously considered to be a rogue concept, but it seems to have filled its own archetype already, and that is Donphan Samurott. I've talked about this a few times already, but here's a skeleton list for you guys to look at if you haven't built anything like the deck before and want to try it out. The idea is to remain as disruptive as you can be with Donphan, getting early knockouts and hopefully getting some reversal heads to pull up Pokemon that are trying to evolve and knock them out before they can, and then in the late game bring out Samurott to tank and deal just a little bit more damage. You can also bring out Samurott fairly early because he only works on 2 energy to attack if you're running double colorless energy, and he one-shots all those fire Pokemon that can give you trouble. Now, once again, this deck does suffer from not having that consistent draw, but who says you can't fit a Magnezone Prime in this deck? I've actually seen it work pretty well. It can help you draw, and since you're already running the rare candy to evolve to Samurott, it's not that bad as a 1-0-1 line, or even thicker if you're paranoid about not being able to draw up. The deck usually runs Rainbow Energy anyways, so I guess you could attack with Magnezone Prime if you desired that as well. Now, I'm not saying that Magnezone's the only tech that works in this deck, but I found it to work pretty well, and if you're really considering running this build, I definitely recommend at least trying the Magnezone as I have in the skeleton list. I hope you guys enjoy that. I really think that Samurott Donphan has a good chance against the metagame. It has about a 50-50 matchup against Emboar Magnezone, and that alone makes it a pretty desirable deck to try out. Next up is a build that a lot of you guys were requesting, and I finally put together and tested, and I think it's alright. Kingdra Mandibuzz. Now, the idea is to use Kingdra Prime's Pokepower to drop damage counters, and then you use Mandibuzz's 1 energy attack to get some quick snipes out and knock out basic Pokemon right away. It functions sort of like the Stage 1 decks, where you're trying to get Pokemon knocked out very quickly, but you don't even need reversal if you get both Kingdra and Mandibuzz out. Now, this is the one big problem that I have, getting Kingdra and Mandibuzz out. The reason that decks like Emboar Magnezone can afford to get all those Stage 2 Pokemon, along with hard-to-get-out Pokemon like Rayquaza Deoxys Legend, are because of Magnezone and that consistent draw. Once again, you don't have that here, and you have to rely on those supporters to get through everything that you need. However, if you can get out that 1 Kingdra and 1 Mandibuzz, you can really steal prizes pretty quickly. Once again, stuff needs to rare candy to get up, and if you can knock it out before they evolve, you can shut your opponent out pretty quickly. For example, you can knock out your opponent's Magnemite before they even have a chance of turning into a Magnezone, thus giving you an early advantage, allowing you to continually pick off Pokemon while your opponent suffers in setting up. The deck can still run Rainbow Energy, or even Water Energy to work with Kingdra too, which provides a nice 60 damage, along with any extra damage that you're doing with this Pokemon power. Altogether, it's a pretty nice deck. It hits for a good medium amount of damage, but it does have one major weakness. Not only can it not run Magnezone, but it suffers against any Magnezone that your opponent can set up. If they can get a Magnezone out, you're in for a world of hurt. All your Pokemon are weak to lightning, they're going to have a very easy time knocking you out, only having to do 1 energy into the Lost Zone to knock out your Mandibuzz, or 2 to knock out your Kingdra, and that is pretty tough considering how big the deck's going to be. However, I think that the deck's pretty good. It can disrupt very quickly against some of the slower decks when they whiff on all those cards that they need, and it's just a fun deck to play. And lastly is Lostgar, which in my opinion is one of the best decks out of this list of 5, and it's a definite contender for the United States National Championships. Here's how it works. Use Gengar Prime to throw things into the Lost Zone, but you have a ton of room for partners, particularly Mew Prime, which lets you throw Gengar Prime out very quickly, and then for just 1 Psychic Energy, you can keep throwing Pokemon into the Lost Zone with Mew Prime without having to worry to set up that full Gengar Prime. Now, I think that the best lists run a combination of both, but I've seen some lists run on only Mew Prime and another Pokemon, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Using just Mew Prime does leave you a little vulnerable, though. He only has 60 HP, he's easy to knock out, and while he's very fast, has free retreat, and sets up really quickly, your opponent could still win the prize trade just because of how easy you are to get knocked out. running a combination of Gengar and Mew seems pretty strong. But there's also another development that people have had so far in Heart Gold Soul Silver on testing, and that's using Mime Jr. Now, Mime Jr. was kind of talked about as a gimmick card in Call of Legends, as being some kind of way to throw your opponent's top card in the Lost Zone and eventually just stall long enough with Mime Jr. to win the game. But with all kinds of other threats, like Garchomp being able to snipe around you, Luxray being able to pull up other things, and only having 30 HP, it didn't really see any success at all. However, running Mime Jr. in combination with all these other things can be extremely strong. He's got free retreat, he works as a great starter, he can wall for a while if you flip tails and stay asleep, therefore preventing any damage that your opponent can do to you, and this format just doesn't really allow you to snipe around as well. The only real option you have for something like that is Yamanga, and otherwise, having an asleep baby Pokemon in the active slot kind of leaves your opponent with nothing to do. Now, throwing your opponent's top card is good enough already. You could throw something very important, or you could just hit a Pokemon off a good pull, but most people are also tagging in a 1/1 Slowking. Now, Slowking lets you rearrange the top 3 cards on either player's deck. Now, when you choose your opponent, you're hopefully going to find a Pokemon up there, put it to the top, and then throw it right away with Mime Jr. However, let's say you have a bad setup yourself, you could also use Slowking to rearrange your own top 3 cards and give yourself some better draw. Now, the deck already has all the tools that I've talked about in past episodes, like Spiritomb, Twins, and Seeker, but these added tools of Mime Jr. and Slowking seem pretty good too. I wouldn't recommend running more than a 1/1 Slowking though. The Slowpoke is a 2 retreat cost, and in a deck that needs to get things out very, very quickly, I would hate to start with it and not be able to retreat for another 2 turns. All in all, I think Gengar Prime's a pretty solid deck, but it does have one fundamental problem. While it is very fast at setting up and throwing things into the Lost Zone, as I've talked about before when evaluating this deck, it has a lot of problems as far as time goes. Now, if time is called, and you haven't declared yourself the winner already after those 3 turns, you'll automatically lose. Even if you have 5 Pokemon thrown into the Lost Zone, and your opponent has only drawn 1 prize, they're going to win just because they've taken more prizes, and that's just how the game's rulings work. Now, this isn't terrible in Swiss, where most games are probably going to end before the 30 minutes plus 3 is up, but in best 2 out of 3, when you need to finish 2 out of 3 games within an hour, it could become a problem. Let's say you win your first game, your opponent can just win a quick game for their second one, and for the third game, just stall their way out and prevent you from finishing the game in time. It's frustrating, but people are going to do what they have to do to win, and having that disadvantage does kind of stink. However, I think that the deck's fast enough where it might be able to combat some of those problems. In this format, I feel like games end a lot quicker than they used to. Even though there isn't faster draw, knockouts are pretty quick and there aren't as many options, so people don't spend too much time just staring at their hand, not knowing what play to make. I highly recommend testing against Gengar Prime before you come into this National Championships, because it's definitely going to be a popular deck. And that's just about it for today's episode. These 5 decks are all solid, and I hope you guys enjoyed the skeleton list to test with, and just learning a little bit more about some of the better decks, but not the best, in this Heart Gold Soul Silver On format. Nationals is coming soon, and I know a lot of you guys would like to hear some of my last words of advice, but if you've been watching Prof-It for a while, you've heard all my advice over and over again. Play a comfortable deck, be prepared, pack early, get there, get a lot of sleep, all that regular stuff. Basically, just be prepared and don't freak yourself out with all the excitement. Just come in to have a great time, and you probably will. I'll see all you guys at the event. Now, I know last year I printed off a bunch of JWittz cards and I handed them out for free to everybody, and I would like to do that again this year, but honestly, I haven't committed to it yet. Last year, I think I made 300 or 400 individual JWittz cards, and before the second day was even over, they were all gone. I had to turn a ton of people away because I just didn't have any more cards to give. Now, this year, Prof-It has grown a lot since last year. It has about 6 or 7 times the viewer base that it used to, and I can only imagine that means I'm going to have to make 6 or 7 times more JWittz cards. Now, as much as I would love to print off 1,000 JWittz cards, they do take a while to make, they cost a little bit to print, and I haven't exactly decided what to do. However, I'll think of something, and if you see me at Nationals, just come and say hi, and hopefully I'll have something to hand over to you, even if it's just a little keepsake from the Prof-It show. I'm going to do my best to give you guys something cool for seeing me at Nationals like I did last year, but I'm sorry if I'm not able to get cards out. Another funny thing is I'll be bringing my 3DS, so if you want a Street Pass, just walk by me and hopefully you'll get my JWittz avatar on your 3DS system. All in all, hope you guys have a great time planning. testing, and I hope you do great at the United States, Canada, or whatever national championship that you go to. I'll see you guys in a week in real life. Peace. That's really good synergy. It's an obvious combo. It's easy to get if you've already had those cards from past
Once we start rolling, you know you can't stop it. Let's go and get some lessons from JWittz and Prof-It.
Let's take a look at each of the Pokemon.